What we're going to do is look at the summer packet. First thing that we're going to start off with is adding and subtracting rationals and multiplying and dividing rationals. These are the topics that I believe you should know walking into Algebra 1, and a good understanding of these 10 topics will give you a good basis for walking into this program and being successful. So starting off with adding and subtracting rationals, what we're going to do is a rational is a positive negative whole number or a positive negative decimal or fraction. We're going to mostly focus on integers, which would be positive and negative whole numbers, and then fractions. It also includes decimals, but it's most important to understand how whole numbers are added and subtracted and fractions. Those are the numbers that we're going to be using the most in Algebra 1. So what I'm going to do is go through a few of these and then leave the rest for you to do to figure out and to learn. So the first one, what we have is our example of what zero property is. 3 plus negative 3 is 0. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Negative 1 plus negative 1 is negative 2. Notice that with the same sign, we add them. With different signs, we subtract. Negative 1 minus a negative 1 would be the same thing as negative 1 plus 1, which of course would be 0. So what we're going to do is first look at adding, and then what we'll do is we'll look at subtracting. When we're adding 8 plus negative 1, that would be 8 positives. And then what we would have is 1 negative. Now, what we just stated was when we have opposites, 1 and a negative 1, it gives you 0. And so when we look at the rest of them, we see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 positives. So that right there would be a positive. Another example would be negative 5 plus negative 1. We have 5 negatives, and we have 1 negative. So that would be a total of 6 negatives. So what we see is that when we have different signs, we subtract. When we have the same sign, we add. Now, if we're looking at this problem, this is subtracting. Now, when we subtract a negative, it becomes a positive. So we have negative 5 plus 3. And so we have the 5 negatives, and we have the 3 positives. Now we have 0, 0, and 0. Remember, when we have opposites, it adds up to 0. That's what zero property states. So if we look at it, we have negative 2 as our answer. Now, looking at this one right here, we have a negative 5 plus a negative 5. We could think of a subtraction as a negative. So what we have are 5 negatives and another 5 negatives. So looking at that, what we have is negative 10. Try these and see how you do. Now, the next thing that we're going to look at is adding and subtracting fractions. The rules are going to be the same. What we have to remember is that when we have a common denominator, we keep the denominator the same. We add the numerators. 1 plus 5 is 6. And remember to reduce. 6/8 reduces to 3/4. Or if we're subtracting, in this case, we have different denominators. So the common denominator would be 20 because 4 times 5 is 20. We multiply the 4 by 5 because 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 1 is 5. Then the 5 we multiply by a 4 because 5 times 4 is 20. So that's our denominator for our other one. 2 times 4 is 8. 5 minus 8, that would be the same thing as 5 plus a negative 8, which we just went over. And that would be negative 3. Our denominator stays the same, so our answer is negative 3 over 20. So let's look at a couple of these. The first one, we have a denominator of 2. Notice that it's a common denominator. So we add the numerators. 1 plus 1 is 2. And 2 over 2 is 1. But since we already have a 1, our answer would be 2. Another one, we have negative 4/5 plus 1/5. Our common denominator is 5. Negative 4 plus 1 would be negative 3. Now, let's look at this one right over here. what we have are two negatives. And remember, when we have two negatives, it becomes a positive. So we're going to be adding these two. Here we're going to be adding the two whole numbers. 3 plus 2 gives us a 5. Our common denominator is a 10. 3 plus 7 is 10. 10 over 10 is 1, but we already have the 5, so that would be a total of 6. So here are a few common denominators. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple that have different denominators. So with this first one right here, we have a 3 and a 2. And so the common denominator would be a 6. We're going to multiply this one by a 2 and this one right here by a 3. 2 times 2 is 4, so that would be a negative 4, 6. 1 times 3 would be a 3. Our common denominator is 6, and so that would be negative 4 plus 3, which is negative 1, and that would be our answer. Let's look at this next one right here to the right of it. We have 4 and 5. We kind of talked about this already, a common denominator of 20. So we're going to multiply this one by 5 because 5 times 4 gives us 20. So 5 times 3 gives us negative 15. Common denominator would be 20, so we multiply this by 4. 2 times 4 is 8. Negative 15 plus negative 8, both of those have the same sign, so we're going to add them, and we get negative 23 over 20. If we were to write this as a mixed number, that means that 20 goes into 23 one time with a remainder of 3. And since it's negative, our answer is negative. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at multiplying and dividing rationals. When we're multiplying and dividing rationals, what we have to remember, and we're going to start with our integers first, and then we're going to move into our fractions. A positive times a positive is a positive. A negative times a positive is a negative. A positive times a negative is a negative. And a negative times a negative is a positive. So let's just look at a couple of these. Negative 7 times negative 3 is a positive 21 because a negative and negative is a positive. 4 times negative 1 is negative 4 because a positive times a negative is a negative. 0 times negative 6, of course, is 0. And negative 5 times negative 6 is a positive 30. Now, it works the same with division. If we have 24 divided by a negative 4, this right here, positive divided by a negative, follows the same rules as a positive times a negative. So we know that the answer is negative, and 4 goes into 24 6 times. So that right there is the integers. Now let's look at the fractions. These are definitely a little bit more difficult. How fractions work is if we have a mixed number, we have 8 times 2 gives us 16, plus 1 gives us 17 over 8. And then when we multiply it, I like to cross cancel 1 and 2. And 1 times 17 is 17. And 2 times 7 is 14. That's the way I like to do it. Some students don't like to cross cancel. So what they do is they multiply across. 17 times 4 is 68. 8 times 7 is 56. And then they reduce it. 14 goes into 17 one time with a remainder of 3 over 14. Now with dividing, what we have to do is we multiply by the reciprocal. Another way of saying this is keep, change, flip. We keep the first fraction, we change the division to multiplication, and we flip the second number. So we have the 2/5, we change it to multiplication, and we flip the 3/10 to 10/3. Once again, I like to cross cancel 1 and 2. So 2 times 2 is 4. 1 times 3 is 3. Once again, if you don't like doing it that way, 2 times 10 is 20. 5 times 3 is 15. And then you reduce it, you get the same answer. 3 goes into 4 one time with a remainder of 1. So that's 1 and 1/3. So looking at a couple of these, let's just start off with our easy one. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 3 is 6. With this next one, negative times a positive is a negative. 2 times 6 is 12. 5 times 7 is 35. Now here we have a couple of dividing problems. With this first one right here, I'm going to keep the first fraction, change it to multiplication, and flip the second one, 7 over 1. 7's cancel, 1 and 1, and negative 6 times 1 is negative 6. 1 times 1 is 1, and that, of course, would be negative 6. With this other one, keep, change, flip. I have 3/4. I change it to multiplication. 4 over 1. The 4's cancel. 1 and 1. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. 1 times 1 is 1. So that would be negative 3. Now, when we're looking at our mixed numbers, I'm going to change it into an improper fraction. 8 times 1 is negative 8. Plus 1 is negative 9. I'm going to multiply that by negative 2/3. I cancel the 2 and the 8, the 3 and the 9. So what I get is negative times a negative is a positive. 3 times 1 is 3. 4 times 1 is 4. Now, if I look at, let's skip over to the dividing at the very end. I have two fractions, so I'm going to turn them into improper fractions. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 1 is 21. Change it to multiplication. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So this is 7/3. And since I changed it to multiplication, remember I flipped the number, keep, change, flip. So that becomes 3/7. 7 goes into 21 3 times. 7 goes into 7 one time. 3 times 3 gives me a 9. 5 times 1 gives me a 5. Negative times a positive, of course, is a negative. 5 goes into 9 one time, so it's negative 1. And then there's a remainder of 4. And that would be my answer.